the campus of Volunteer State Community College. This is Inside Politics.
Hi, and welcome to Inside Politics. I'm Nancy Hauskins. Tennessee lawmakers got an early start this spring with a two-week special session that began on January 12th. Having completed that special session, the General Assembly begins the regular session with a full legislative agenda. Joining us today to share his thoughts about that special session and give us a preview of upcoming legislation is 44th District State Representative Mike McDonald. Good to see you again.
Nancy, good to see you.
Tough time to make extra time in your schedule. I'm sure you all are plenty busy these days.
We are very busy. Just finished the special session, as you mentioned, and now we're in the regular session. All the legislation had to be filed Thursday of this week, and so all the bills have been filed, and next week we'll get down to business in committee.
Let's begin with your take on the extraordinary special education session called by Governor Bredesen. There were two main components. The first concerned changes in K through 12 education. Can you give us some highlights of that legislation?
Be glad to. Actually, there were three components of the special call. One kind of got overlooked, and that dealt with workers' compensation, and we'll be taking that up some more this year. We passed a delay bill to delay implementation of a public chapter that was passed in 2009, but that was actually part of the special call. And then the K through 12 component, and then the higher ed component. Right. The K through 12 component, the one thing that made this very different and somewhat controversial was the fact that teachers have never been evaluated using TCAP scores or value-added test scores. Right. It is still very controversial, in fact. And this was part of the application that was to be submitted to the federal government to try to pull down some stimulus dollars. There were several concerns about this. One is it was being done in just 4 days with little teacher input into this process. So here we are spending a whole year to try to correct a workers' comp piece of legislation, but this was done in 4 days. And a lot of people thought that this was rushed through because of the federal deadline for the money. A couple of things about that money. Number one, we don't know that we'll get any money. You're competing for that money. Number two, you don't know how much you're going to get, but you do know, number three, that it's not going to last. So you're changing the law and putting a new program in place, not knowing whether or not you're going to get the money, and even if you do get the money, it's going to run out. And that means that somebody's going to have to pay for that new program for the long haul.
Was that your major concern with that legislation?
That was a major concern of mine. In fact, I had several concerns, not only the fact that the whole thing was being rushed, but that the federal government money will run out and somebody's going to have to pay for this new program after that money expires. In fact, I never could get a clear answer on how the money was going to be used. If they can't tell you how they're going to use the money, and they can't tell you how the program is going to be paid for when the federal stimulus dollars run out, it seems to me those are pretty good reasons for not voting for the proposal, and I did not vote for the proposal. And also, there is no evidence, Nancy, to support the assertion that value-added test scores are a valid way to evaluate teachers. In fact, I read a whole body of research that simply says it's an unfair, inequitable way to evaluate teachers. There's no validity to using test scores for that purpose. And to me, that was another good reason to vote no. Teachers ought to be held accountable. I was a teacher for 30 years. Teachers ought to be held accountable for what they can control. But there are so many variables that they cannot control, and I don't think they should be held accountable for what they can't control. In fact, I've got a better alternative, and I think a plan that would improve public education, and there are three simple things that you've got to do. One, reduce teacher-pupil ratio. If you want to have effectiveness in the classroom, fewer students, good teachers, that will help create a better learning situation for the students. Number two, I think we have to make the teaching profession attractive. In my hometown, Portland, Tennessee, we've had very good teachers leave Portland and go to Georgia. Why? Because the profession is more attractive in Georgia. Sure. We can't just keep on losing teachers. This legislation that was passed has nothing to do with making the profession attractive. And then number three, you have to provide the facilities and the equipment that teachers need in the classroom. We've got teachers right here in Sumner County who buy supplies out of their own pockets. and pay for those things to have a good classroom environment for their students. So here we are starting a new program. We don't know for sure where the money is coming from to continue this new program. All the while, we don't have adequate resources to do what we're doing currently. So I had some real reservations about the proposal.
It's interesting you said about making the position more attractive. My sister's a school teacher in the area here, and she has said that she works in one of the blue ribbon schools, and there's really very little room for growth. Their students are already doing really well, and she's concerned that they're all going to get failing grades because their students are doing so well. Are you hearing similar things from the teachers in your district?
I have heard that, and I've heard the opposite end too.
Sure.
But on the high end, if a student is achieving this much, and value added is the measurement instrument, then they can't go much higher. Right. And consequently, you don't have that value added dimension to it. So yeah, there's that concern, and that's going to reflect poorly on the teacher. Right. While the teacher is doing an outstanding job. And on the other end, I've heard about students using excuses to miss a lot of days of class. Some students come to class sick, physically ill. Some students just don't care. They'll mark an item or two on the test sheet and turn it over and put their head down on their desk. There's so many variables that cause inequities in this process, and I hope our teachers aren't demoralized by this new legislation. I think we ought to be encouraging our teachers and not trying to create hardships.
Going to be some big changes. As you mentioned, you were in the teaching profession for more than 30 years as a college professor. The second component that we really heard about a lot in the media dealt with higher education. What do you see as the significant changes in those mandates?
The big change is in the funding formula, and that's the main thing that caused a lot of concern. Previously, we've used enrollment numbers and FTE to determine funding for the community colleges and the colleges and universities across the state. And now it's going to be outcome-based. Nobody knows for sure what that funding formula is going to look like. In fact, the Tennessee Higher Education Commission is charged with coming up with a new formula, and it will not be based just on numbers, but it'll be based on outcomes. Now, a concern that I had, and I did vote for the legislation, I supported it for a couple of other, I think, good reasons, but how are we going to do this? You know, community colleges have a different mission. Our average age student is about 28 at Vol State. We have folks who have degrees who've already completed their college degree, but they come back to Vol State to take a few courses. Then we have folks who come with no intention of earning a degree. And if you're going to base it on graduation rates and outcomes, you have to factor in those considerations. Sure. And that's what we urged in this legislation, is that when THEC puts this formula together, that they consider the uniqueness of community colleges, our unique mission, and factors like the ones I just described. And I'm optimistic that THEC will do that when they put it together. Now, there were a couple of really good parts to this proposal. One is articulation. If a student takes the basic English course at Vol State, it ought to count at a senior institution. They shouldn't have to take that course over again. And that's the way it is with most core requirements. They simply should be able to take that course and transfer that to a senior institution without any difficulty. That'll save money, it'll save time, it'll help the student graduate on time. Sometimes people transfer and they have to take so many courses over and over and over again, and it takes them 6 years to earn a 4-year degree, and that's just not right. And the other part of this is transition to the 4-year institutions. When you finish your 2-year degree at Vol State or any of the community colleges, you will automatically become a junior at a senior institution. And the whole idea is to keep people on track and get them to complete their 4-year degree in a timely manner. So there are a lot of pluses to this, a lot of benefits, I think, to students, and there are some unknowns about the funding formula. But I'm convinced that the community colleges and the presidents will have input into the creation of that new formula, and we all hope it goes well.